We buy the first business in 2011. We buy the second business in 2012. Now we're a holding company. We have business cards, holding company. We introduce ourselves as a holding company. We did 3 to 4 meetings a week looking at companies every week, and we didn't find our third acquisition until 2016. So 4 years passed, and we don't buy a third business. And in that time, there was a lot of second guessing. I mean, there was a lot of, internal questioning of, are we ever going to find another business? And what are we doing here?
You have a holding company like us. There's not a lot of us out there. And you own a very diverse set of businesses also like us. Can you give us a little overview about the suite of businesses that you own?
My business partner and I started our holding company, Alternative Holdings, in 2011. And, initially, we weren't even doing a holding company. We simply saw a private business for sale that was selling at a multiple that we found attractive. And it was an industrial sales company. So doing mainly B2B sales of lubricants and filters in the construction industry. And we bought that business. And when we bought it, we came in with just a couple rules. One was neither of us were going to operate it. We were gonna delegate that management. So part of our process of buying it was identifying somebody in the structure that could remain post transaction and continue operating it for us. And the second was that we weren't going to collect a dividend. So we were going to reinvest our cash flows to organically grow the company. And about a year later, we were presented with the opportunity to buy a second business. This was in business process outsourcing. So mainly, initially, it was in call centers. And when we did that second acquisition is when we formally create the holding company, because now we're not just reinvesting in industrial sales to simply build this business out. We now have two completely separate, diverse companies. So that was almost 15 years ago. Since then, we've done a total of around 9 or 10 acquisitions. We look at our holding company and in verticals. So some of those acquisitions have been to initiate a new vertical or a new industry, let's say, and others have been smaller that have been more bolt-on acquisitions. So today we continue to operate in industrial sales. We continue to operate in business process outsourcing. We're also restaurant operators and franchisors. And then we also have furniture retail, and we also distribute plumbing supplies, mainly focused on water heating. So as you said, very diverse. One doesn't have much to do with the other, but that's how we've grown.
Yeah, I have a bunch of questions around that. What were you guys doing before this first business came on your map? Like, how did you know that this was a good multiple? How did you have the money to buy it?
Background is in financial services, so I studied economics at UC San Diego. Went to work in asset management. I worked at Fisher Investments up in Woodside, California, and then I actually moved to Panama, which is where I'm based out of, and worked in the investment side of a bank here. And that bank got bought out by HSBC. And when it got bought, I had to me at the time was an enormous, now I look at it, it was relatively small liquidity event because I owned shares in the bank. There was an employee stock plan, and I got some liquidity. My business partner was in real estate development. So both of us came from the investment side of things. We had both owned private companies before, and they were really small. I owned a car wash. He owned a juice bar in a hospital. So we'd done the really small, but 3 employee type businesses before as investments, and we partnered up to buy that industrial sales company. So when you say why did we think it was a good investment, I mean, being completely honest, I was so inexperienced back then. I always say we were more lucky than good. I looked at it as the company was selling. It had been around for over 10 years. It was selling a product that I believe we would continue to need. Panama, we don't manufacture many things, so distribution is a pretty good business here. Everything is pretty much imported and then resold through distributors. And it was selling for about 3.5x trailing 12-month EBITDA. So I was used to looking at the stock market and paying 10 to 25x for an investment. So when I saw something at 3.5x, I figured, well, I can't go wrong. I did not understand back then the nuances of working capital. I didn't get all that. I learned that on the job. I would say. We've gotten a bit more sophisticated. I'm sure in 15 years I'll look back to today and say I didn't know anything now, but I feel at least now I know more than I knew back then, you know.
Yeah, I'm embarrassed to say that when made my first acquisition, I did not know how to properly read a balance sheet. So it took a little bit to to get ramped up around that. And I went to business school. I took accounting classes. I took finance classes. It's just I think it was like it was like oil bouncing off of water or vice versa. It was just hitting me and then going away until I owned the business and actually had to like think about the dynamics of the cash flow and what was going
There
on.
it is too. I mean, it's a lot of these things. I just think you learn them when you're really living them. It's one thing to read it out of a textbook. It's another thing to you have to make payroll, and to make payroll,
Right.
you need to produce cash. So I better figure out how this all works. I need to sell that inventory or collect those receivables because on the 15th I have to pay people. And we were never in that role of CEO of any of these businesses, but we call ourselves managing directors. So we are much more engaged than just a passive investor or even just a typical board of directors. I mean, we are in constant communication with our CEOs, and we are overseeing, especially when things are going wrong. We're the ones getting pulled in to help. Especially in the beginning when we were a lot
Right.
smaller.
How did that first acquisition go? How good were you guys at sticking to your guns about not operating the business and not taking dividends? I think those are the two main.
Never taken a dividend. So 15 years later, we've never paid ourselves a dividend. People then go, well, how do you live? Well, we pay ourselves a salary. So
Right.
we have a management company that does charge a fee to each business, and we are paid a salary. I will say it's not a hidden dividend in the sense that we're taking less than 0.5% of sales across the holding as a salary. I believe it's a market rate for what it would cost to hire my partner and I.
Okay.
And as far as the delegated management, I think we've gotten a lot better at that. In the beginning, I feel really bad for the guy who was our first general manager of that company because since there was only one company and there were two of us, you can imagine, I mean, we didn't have much else to do. So we'd both go to all the meetings. We would both want to have breakfast with them every single week. And I think, I always say we did everything possible to kill that business unintentionally. And it's one of the lessons I took from it is small and medium sized businesses. I know people like to focus a lot on disruption and they like to look at a lot of the ideas of the blockbusters, the famous, Kodak or these famous examples of industries being disrupted. There's so many more, especially in this SMB space of companies that once they've been around, once they've made it past 10, 20, 30 years and they're attending that local market, they're really hard to kill. As long as you don't overload them with debt, uh, they can withstand a lot of business
Hmm.
cycles, a lot of mistakes. You won't make much money, but they'll survive. Um,
Right.
and I think that learning that is what gave us the confidence to continue in this field and doing these acquisitions. We saw that there was a bit of a Lindy effect there, where something had been around so many years, it's going to be around so many years more.
You guys could have gone deep on industrials and distribution companies, right? You could have built an empire just around those two kind of intersecting concepts. Why did you decide to, let's say, diversify beyond even the first or second company? Why did you decide to go into into restaurants and other types of businesses as well?
So this is, if you permit me, this might be a long answer, but I think this is a super important point about what we do. So first to mention is, so we buy the first business in 2011. We buy the second business in 2012. Now we're a holding company. We have business cards, holding company. We introduce ourselves as a holding company. We did 3 to 4 meetings a week looking at companies every week, and we didn't find our third acquisition until 2016. So 4 years passed and we don't buy a third business. And in
Wow.
that time, there was a lot of second guessing. I mean, there was a lot of, internal questioning of, are we ever going to find another business? And what are we doing here? Our wives would make jokes and say, are you guys retired? Because you're not running the companies. You're sitting at your office, you're going to meetings, but what activity are you really doing? What are you producing?
Hmm.
Um, and during that time, I remember I still have the document. We wrote up a document of what our future paths could be. And one of them is what you said. Hey, let's just You be the CEO of industrial sales, I'll be the CEO of business process outsourcing, and let's try and grow these businesses as big as they can be. That was one path. Another one was let's go the 3G capital type route of if another deal comes up, it won't be a part of the holding. We'll treat it as a separate investment. We'll raise the capital as needed for that, and we'll do it. But we're going to continue focusing on our two operating businesses. And the third was what we call, the Berkshire model, obviously the famous model of continuing to look to build this horizontally structured holdco. And we chose the third option. And in 2016, we were able to buy that third business. So I think it's important to understand the difference between that horizontal holdco and that vertical roll-up strategy holdco, because they really favor different personality and different skill sets. So I always look at the roll-up strategy, the platform, the vertically integrated, going deep in one industry holding company favors the operator. It's the person who can come in and identify a business and say, I can do this better than you are doing it. I can identify the cost savings. I can identify the best processes that I'm going to apply across the board. I'm going to roll out this software for all of my businesses. I'm going to do it better than the previous owner has been doing it. What's the drawback of that strategy? If the sector you're participating in becomes popular, especially with private equity, the multiples you're going to pay for those businesses is going to increase. And you are going to have to, if you want to grow inorganically, continue paying those prices to build that out. The horizontal holdco, which is what we do, where we're industry agnostic. So we will buy in multiple different industries. I always look at it as we will go to fish where we find the fish, and where there's not that many other fishermen. It favors the investor. I cannot apply best practices across my companies, except in accounting, which is our strong suit. But they're not all using the same software. My poor COO probably has the hardest job in the office because she's in charge of kind of coordinating these operation issues across a wide spectrum of industries and different CEOs, different geographies. But it enables me to buy the businesses where the opportunities present themselves. So a clear example is HVAC. HVAC repair and services is a super hot sector. You all have an investment in that sector. Multiple PEs have been playing in that sector. It's probably been the most popular sector in SMB, I would say, over the last 36 months. And the multiples on those businesses reflected that. We turned around and we bought the people selling the products to those service companies. And those companies we were able to pick up at 4 to 5x. So we wouldn't have been able to do that if we were simply focused on one sector. So I would again say that the reason we went horizontal is because we consider ourselves much more investors than operators. So it favored our skill set. And then the last thing I would add to that is, even if you decide to go horizontal, which is what we did, inevitably, in our experience, one or two of those businesses will become much larger weighted in importance to the holding than the others. So for example, restaurants in Panama now make up 75% of our profit. Why? Because good management met a good opportunity. We had the right CEO in place and we had the right opportunity, and we were able to scale up from 3 locations initially to 30 locations today. And we have not seen that same type of opportunity in industrial sales. So what started as maybe a third of importance now has one that is just outsized. So even if we consider ourselves horizontal, the management team kind of did that vertical growth for us. And in the United States, it's been through the distribution of plumbing supplies and water heating. That business now represents 80% of our sales in the US, and even more of our profits. And it's just because really good management, good acquisition opportunities, deal flow starts flowing that way. People learn that you're playing in that field. You start getting better opportunities. And so even if we weren't focused on doing a platform or a roll-up strategy in one specific industry, it tended that way anyway,